We've been hearing about President Donald Trump's tariffs for months. And honestly, I kind of just stopped thinking about them. Because first they were on.
Mr. President, is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
And then they were off.
It looks like the US has blinked because in the last few minutes, I'm just looking at the markets now, they've rocketed up, the US stock market up 6% on that news.
The deadlines kept moving.
Just literally in the last couple of minutes, we're hearing that President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for all countries except China, he's saying.
Sometimes it seemed like the tariffs weren't actually going to happen, but the threat of them were just negotiating tactics.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
Was tough negotiations. I knew it at the beginning, and it was indeed very tough, but we came to good conclusions for both sides. So again, congratulations and many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But then I woke up this morning and the tariffs are here and they are real. So now what? From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Thursday, August 7th. Today, what these tariffs mean for all of us now that they're here. I talked with my colleague David Lynch. He's The Washington Post's in-house expert on tariffs and global trade. He literally just wrote a book on the subject. David, thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
So, David, we're talking at 10 a.m. These sweeping tariffs took effect at midnight. What does that mean? What countries have what tariffs as of right now?
Well, the tariffs that took effect just past midnight last night apply to something like 90 countries, and they range on the low side from 10% for places like the United Kingdom all the way up to 50% for countries like Brazil. But the numbers vary depending on whether a trading partner has signed a deal with the president, depending on how much of a trade deficit we're running with that country, because the president is trying to close the trade deficit. But the one thing that I think is clear, if you're a supply chain manager for any company in the United States that brings in widgets to make a product here or that brings in retail goods to sell to consumers like you and I, anything you're bringing in from abroad is going to be more expensive than it was. And it's also going to be a much more complicated landscape because you've got to figure out where is this good coming from, how is it being assessed, what product is it in some cases. It's just a much more complicated landscape than it was, say, at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this on the show before, but David, just remind us, what are tariffs exactly?
Well, tariff is just a fancy word for tax. That's all it is. This is a tax on imported goods because, again, the president wants Americans to buy fewer things from overseas. He wants more stuff to be made here. That sounds like a laudable objective. Most people at first glance would support that. The difficulty is we don't make everything here. We don't grow a lot of coffee here. That's why we bring it in from Brazil or Kenya. We don't have a lot of banana farms. That's why we bring bananas in from elsewhere. But the idea is by making those foreign products more expensive, you as a consumer and American businesses as a intermediate consumer will be encouraged to buy stuff made here in the United States, not overseas.
But just to be clear, these other countries, like Brazil itself as a country, is not paying this tax, right?
Correct.
Like when a good arrives here, what happens?
Yep. No, that's an important point because the president has clouded the issue by repeatedly saying that countries will pay the tax. That's not the case. The U.S. importer of record is legally responsible for paying that tax, and they pay it in the following way. The good that they're importing lands, say, at the Port of Los Angeles. As it enters the country, officials with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency determine what type of product it is, where it's from, and they assess the appropriate tariff against that product. Let's say it's $100 worth of stuff from China, and the applicable tariff should be 55%. It's $100 worth of stuff, 55%
Thanks
tariff.
for picking $100 for my math mind.
I haven't taken a math course in a long time, but this I can handle. So you owe the government, you, the importer, the American importer, you owe the government $55. And you have to pay the customs agency that money, just like when you and I come back from traveling overseas. If we've bought a rug in Turkey or some chocolates somewhere, if there's a customs duty, you have to pay it to bring that item into the country. Same for a U.S. importer. They pay the customs agency, they bring the product in. Now, we can have a slightly longer conversation about how that cost is ultimately apportioned, and maybe we'll do that later.
Well, yeah, I actually do want to ask you this because, like I said, I kept hearing about this deadline. It kept getting extended. It kept getting extended. So now that it's here, my immediate question is, if I go to the store later today or tomorrow, will a product that I saw on Monday now be 20% more?
No. First of all,
like immediately prices are not immediately overnight going up.
No, this is more what I would describe as a slow burn. It's not like flipping a light switch and suddenly every type of product is X% more expensive. It's a little more complicated than that. And companies, they've seen a lot of these tariffs coming because Lord knows the president's been talking about them since January 20th in some cases. So if you're an importer and you hear the president talking about tariffs just about every day, you react to that. And so in many cases, companies have been bringing more stuff into the country, particularly in the first 3 months of the year, trying to get ahead of any tariff increases. So they've been stocking up their inventory, and then they've been selling that off over the past few months. And so that has insulated many of us from price increases so far. Some companies have already begun raising prices because, there are tariffs that have taken effect already before the ones that took effect last night on things like steel and aluminum. So steel prices have gone up. That's affected, folks who make Campbell soup or beer cans or cars or all sorts of things. So in many cases, they've adjusted their prices, but not everything in the economy. And likewise, what happened just past midnight today is not something where you should rush out to the store right now, but you're going to start seeing more of this, again, a slow burn, percolate through the economy as companies run out of that inventory that they brought in before tariffs took effect and start importing more product that is hit with the new tariff. Then they're going to have to, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, they've talked about raising prices.
What goods should consumers expect to see most impacted in this slow burn?
Well, just yesterday, the company that makes Florsheim and Nunn Bush shoes said they began raising prices July 1st because of the tariffs that they were already paying and expected to pay. Procter & Gamble a week or two ago said they'd be lifting prices on about a quarter of their product portfolio. And, P&G makes tons of stuff that every American household uses, Tide detergent, Head and Shoulders, Mr. Clean, and Pampers diapers. Now, I should say that the Procter & Gamble didn't say they were going to raise prices on everything they make. They said about a quarter of their product.
But those are some essential items.
Absolutely.
Diapers are things that, if I hear, maybe the price of diapers will go up, that feels pretty big.
Absolutely. And again, the other thing that's complicated about tariffs is people hear, there's, a 25% tariff on products from country X. That doesn't mean the final price of that good goes up by 25%. Because if I'm the importer and I have a Chinese factory making my product and my costs as the importer are going up by 25% because I have to pay for it, as we discussed, to bring it into the country. Well, I don't want to bear that all myself if I can find somebody else to pay it. So I may lean on you as my Chinese supplier and say, look, you got to help me out here. You got to eat some of this cost, or I'm going to find somebody else to make my diapers or to make my detergent. And maybe in many cases you want to hang on to your American business because this is a big market. It's a lucrative market. And so you'll find ways to make your operation a little more efficient. And so you'll say, yeah, I'll eat about 5% of that, or I'll eat 10% of that. And then I, as the importer, can find a way to maybe operate a little more efficiently. Maybe I'll use more machinery than people in my factory, or I'll cut costs somewhere else. I won't give out pay raises or whatever. And then when we get to the point where, okay, you've taken as much as you can take, I've taken as much as I can take, then I got to turn around and raise prices on the final customer, the American consumer, but it won't be 25% because maybe you've eaten 10 and I'll eat 10. So maybe the price will go up by 5%.
I don't know, the cynic in me feels like, why wouldn't a company just turn to raising prices as the first option, especially if the product they're making, the competition is all kind of in the same boat as you?
Well, they often don't do it as the first option because many markets are still very competitive. And we've come out of this episode under the Biden administration where inflation was quite high for a couple of years. People got very angry about it. They were unfamiliar with inflation after the previous 15 or so years when inflation had been almost non-existent. And so companies were able to raise prices during that episode. They've been a little slower to act this time because nobody really knew where the tariffs were going to land. The first 3 or 4 months of this, the president would say one thing about tariffs on Monday, he'd say a different thing on Tuesday. A week later, he'd say something completely different. And companies said, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to be paying in 3 months or 6 months for my goods from overseas. Let me just try and hunker down and get through this and see where things land. And now we're getting a little more clarity. They feel like they know where things are going to be to some degree. So now the price increases are starting to happen. And another important point is, even though the tariffs make the foreign products more expensive, domestic makers who compete with foreign goods see that happening and say, oh, my foreign competition just became 10% more expensive. Well, I'm going to raise my prices 8%.
Oh, but it still seems like, hey, I'm cutting you a deal.
As long as I'm cheaper than the foreign guy, I'll probably pick up some market share. I'm not going to just stand still. There's money on the table here. I'm going to grab it.
Yeah, wow. Have individual companies been trying to directly lobby the Trump administration to get exemptions to these tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, companies have been, as you would expect, in as fluid and irregular a landscape as we're in at the moment, have been trying to pull whatever levers they can to frankly get on the president's good side, to convince administration officials that, their product is essential or special in some way.
One thing that really caught my eye, though, was the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, appearing in the Oval Office yesterday.
Mr. President, thank you very much for having me here today. You've been a great advocate for American innovation and manufacturing. I'm grateful for your leadership.
He gave Donald Trump this gift, and what deal exactly were they talking about? Because that moment really struck me as, wow, that this massive company is striking a deal in this moment with the president directly, not a country, this company.
Yeah, and Apple, I think, has been among the most successful at sort of playing the Trump administration game, if you will. And yesterday, Mr. Cook, as you say, was in the Oval Office with the president for a ceremony to highlight Apple's decision to up its planned investment in the United States to $600 billion over the next several years.
Investment of what?
Well, there are questions about this. It's described as an American manufacturing initiative, and Apple, which has long had a supply chain centered in China, is moving production of some items back to the United States.
So, but then what do they get in exchange for saying that they're going to do this?
Well, they get a tariff consideration, and that tariff exemption applies to the semiconductors, the computer chips that Apple brings into the country and other products that it makes in China. And I should say this was a big deal to Apple. This was something that, if the decision had gone the other way, could have cost them a couple $100 million. The company said a few months ago, I think, to investors. And, Tim Cook personally got involved, lobbied Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, and I think is generally seen as one of the more successful CEOs, not just in the president's current term, but back in his first term. Cook has been very successful at sort of getting what he needs out of the Trump administration and dodging the worst of the rhetorical brickbats that the president can throw at CEOs.
After the break, we talk about what these tariffs could mean for the broader economy. We'll be right back. So in the lead up to this moment, President Trump has talked about this deadline and these tariffs being a negotiating tactic in some way and extracting deals. I know things are fluid, things could change, but as of right now, What sort of deals, and I'm using quotation marks here, deals have been struck and which may happen in the coming days with what countries?
Yeah, the president has announced deals with some major trading partners like the European Union and Canada, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the details vary from country to country. These are not what we think of as full-blown trade deals like the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement back in the mid-'90s, which most people are familiar with. That sort of agreement was A, approved by Congress, B, as thick as a phone book, and also thus legally binding. It was an actual treaty, as was the USMCA, which was the United States, USM, Mexico, Canada agreement that the president negotiated in his first term that replaced NAFTA. That was also, an actual treaty with 30 chapters, lots of details. These are a few pages.
Are they legally binding?
No, because they're just agreements, and there's nothing to stop the president from deciding to raise tariffs in a different way 6 months or a year from now. And in many cases, like the European Union and I think Korea and Japan have pledged to make certain investments in the United States. Well, the European Union, or the European Commission, which is the executive arm of it, has no power to compel European companies to make investments anywhere. So these are aspirational goals. When they say they're going to invest $600 billion, well, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EC, cannot command Mercedes-Benz to go open a new plant in the United States.
Can the president just unilaterally do this, make these decisions around tariffs? I thought Congress had to be involved in this.
You're not alone in that thought. Yeah, there's one big interesting question that hangs over this whole enterprise, which is, does the president have the authority that he's claimed to do what he's been doing? And from the start, the president has invoked a law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which does not mention the word tariffs anywhere in its text. It gives the president authority at a time of national emergency to do all sorts of things with the economy, including regulate imports. Now, the administration has said that gives the president carte blanche authority to do whatever he wants to levy tariffs of any number on any product. Now, no president in history has used this law, which is referred to as IEEPA, in this way. No one has ever used it to raise tariffs.
So we're in a truly unprecedented moment.
Truly unprecedented. The national emergency that he declared is the trade deficit that we've been running every year since 1975. So is something that started 50 years ago, does that qualify as an emergency? The administration's argument is yes, that the economic effects have been so dire that it is now an emergency that we must meet with these high tariffs. This is being tested in court. The administration has already lost once at a specialized court called the Court of International Trade, appropriately enough. Those judges ruled that the president does not have this authority. The administration has appealed in federal appeals court. Arguments there were heard last week. We should get a decision from that 11-judge panel sometime in the coming weeks, that no one's sure when. It's likely that this question will eventually make its way to the Supreme Court, which has shown a deference to executive power, but there have been limits. The court has said, for instance, that the Federal Reserve is sort of a special case. The president can't exert his authority willy-nilly over the Fed. So it would be an interesting test to see this case reach the Supreme Court. If the administration were to lose, which is a real possibility, you can't be certain, but it's a possibility, the president would effectively have to start over. And in theory, it would also require the government to refund all the tariff money that they've been collecting to the importers who paid it, which would be quite an administrative and financial burden.
What countries are you paying attention to on the question of, will they try to come to the table and sit down and have some kind of framework agreement to lower their tariff?
Yeah, I think that the big ones that are still out there are India, Brazil. Switzerland's a smaller economy, but they were stunned by the president's decision to hit them with a 39% tariff. And before you ask me why, I have no idea.
And what about India? Because I think that was a new one, right?
Yeah, and the India situation is striking because the bigger picture here is for several years now, under both Republicans and Democrats, the U.S. has been trying to develop a better relationship with India as a counterweight to China. And this is a strange way to develop that relationship because the tariff, what the president calls a reciprocal tariff, was 25%. It's now been doubled to 50%.
Oh, my gosh.
Because the president doesn't like that India is continuing to buy Russian oil. And so just in the blink of an eye, he doubled that tariff. The U.S. trade negotiators, always complain about dealing with India. It's always a tough negotiation, even under the best of circumstances. There are protectionist pressures within India. Their agricultural industry is a lot of very small and often very poor, small-scale farm holders. And so the government's very wary of just opening up that market and letting giant American operations meet the demand there. It would put a lot of people out of work. And so those negotiations are always fraught. So it's not a surprise that this has become difficult. What is a surprise, though, is for a country that has strategic value and importance to the United States to hit them in the face with a 50% tariff is interesting.
We've talked a lot about what these tariffs could mean for U.S. consumers. What could these tariffs mean for the broader global economy?
Well, the global economy has been remarkably resilient so far. It has not been growing at sort of, a particularly impressive pace, but it has been growing and been continuing to grow, been continuing to make progress globally on bringing down inflation. But what's going to happen as these tariffs take effect going forward is it acts almost like a runner trying to run a marathon. You'd rather be running it without a 25-pound backpack. And this is the 25-pound backpack that the global economy is going to have to run with.
Wow.
It's just going to make things a little less efficient. It's going to slow things down, and it's going to become an increasing problem.
And what about the U.S. economy? I took a look at the stock market today. It seemed like the markets looked okay. What could these do to the U.S. economy going forward?
Yeah, the market has been remarkably strong since it sold off quite noticeably back in April after the president first announced all of these, again, what he calls reciprocal tariffs, dozens and dozens of countries affected. The market took a nosedive.
Oh, yeah. I remember people saying if you have a 401k, don't look at it.
Yeah, which is always good advice.
Yeah, I guess so.
But since then, it's up from the depths of that sell-off. It's up something like 26, 27%. So the market has looked at this and said, okay, we can live with it, which is not what people initially expected. But you're starting to see an erosion in the economic performance. And this was behind the president's decision last week to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics when he got a jobs report that he didn't like. That jobs report showed that some of the strength that we thought the U.S. economy had over the last few months was a mirage, that the job growth that we thought had occurred in May and June basically had not occurred. And for the last 3 months, job growth has been anemic at best. So we're going into what is going to be sort of the blank just got real phase of this trade episode because
no longer theoretical.
No longer
They're
theoretic.
here.
They're here. And so economists are starting to say the economy that already has been slowing, job growth anemic, inflation pressures still proving stubborn and ticking up just a bit. Economists expect now further slowing in the growth. Of course, you can get different estimates from different people, but somewhere around 0 to maybe 1%. That's going to feel pretty slow. And if job growth remains where it is, that's going to feel not so great to the average person. But not a recession, not the end of the world, not a financial crisis. Things aren't falling off a cliff. It's just, again, you're going to be running with that 25-pound backpack.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking time to explain all of this once again. I truly appreciate it, and I wish you many cups of coffee in the coming hours and days and weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks.
David Lynch covers trade for The Post. He's also the author of a new book, The World's Worst Bet: How the Globalization Gamble Went Wrong and What Would Make It Right. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Sabi Robinson. It was edited by Maggie Penman with help from Rena Flores. It was mixed by Sam Baer. Thank you to Tadeo Ruiz Sandoval, Rennie Svirnovsky, Laura Benshoff, and Jen Liberto. If you value this kind of reporting, please subscribe to The Washington Post. We actually have a great deal going right now on a premium subscription. That comes with 3 extra logins that you can share with friends and family. Check it out at washingtonpost.com/subscribe, and we'll also include a link to it in our show notes. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.